Good evening to all our guests and to Ananta Center, especially our panelists. My name is Deepak Bhojwani. I was in the Indian Foreign Service and had the pleasure of serving 12 years in Latin America. I served in one of the countries which is represented on this panel, and I had the pleasure of visiting all the others and of learning what Latin America means to India. This session is especially important today because we are commemorating 10 years of the formation of what is perhaps one of the most significant groupings, regional groupings in Latin America and the Caribbean. The region consists of 33 nation states in different dimensions. What we have here are 4 nation states that decided over a decade ago to congregate and take a step towards more practical and pragmatic integration, not top down, politically taking a decision and then hoping that things would follow. These 4 nations, which are Colombia, Chile, Mexico, and Peru, all agreed that they would form what's called the Pacific Alliance, coming from the concept of the Pacific Rim. And this is now a reality. This was formed in 2011 and formalized in 2012. That's very briefly to tell you what the session is all about, if you haven't already read about it. The important thing here is that we have a very distinguished panel, which is consisting of Mrs. Gloria Gante, the Joint Secretary for Latin America and the Caribbean in the Ministry of External Affairs. She has had a very illustrious career in the Foreign Service. She happens to have served extensively in Europe, in Madrid, in Rome, and in Geneva as counselor in the Permanent Mission of India to the UN. She's also served in Oman and, of course, last but not the least, in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. She's a fluent Spanish speaker and also has served earlier in the Latin American Caribbean division. So we are very fortunate to have somebody who's had so much experience and who knows so much about Latin America. We then have the ambassador of Colombia to India, who is also holding the pro tempore presidency of the Pacific Alliance. Her name is Mariana Pacheco Montes. I'm sure you see her on the screen. She has recently come to India as she was Deputy Chief of Mission at the Colombian Embassy in Washington, D.C. She has an extensive repertoire of work in the corporate sector in Colombia and in other countries, and also has exposure to the Organization of American States. And she has had 2 stints, of course, in Washington and has represented her country admirably for several years. She has a master's in international public policy at Johns Hopkins and several other titles to her name. We then have Mr. Juan Angulo, the ambassador of Chile to India, who has been here for a little over 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. And he has, since 2018. He has extensive multilateral experience, has served his country in France and in other missions, including to the EU in Belgium. He has also been in the Netherlands. He now joins us also in his capacity as one of the veteran ambassadors of Latin America. And we have, following that, we have Mr. Federico Salas Lopfe, ambassador of Mexico to India. He has joined India. He has joined his mission a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken, and also has extensive experience in diplomacy, having served in the US, having served in international organizations, and of course, in his own country in various departments. We then have Carlos Rafael Polo Castaneda, Carlos Polo, the ambassador of Peru to India, also an experienced diplomat who has extensive degrees. His repertoire, his academic repertoire is very impressive. He has also served in several missions for his country in Latin America itself, and has also held multilateral and other posts in his career. He has served in European affairs, etc. And I believe he has been ambassador since May 2019. So we have this very distinguished panel, all of whom I have personally known, and I can tell you are extremely well versed with not just India, but also with the relationship that India has with this part of the world, not just with their countries, but with the region as a whole. Before we allow the speakers to take on their presentations, I'd just like you to send to just like to inform you all who are attending that you will be able to pass your questions throughout the session. You don't have to wait till the end, but do it through the chat. Our colleagues in the Ananta Center will pass those on to us. We will try as far as possible to take up all the questions that you have, but I'm almost certain, given the size of the audience we have today, it will be almost impossible within the time that we have. And we will try and get back to you on this. I'm sorry, before I go further, let me also introduce another panelist, Mr. Marcelo Wurman, who has taken over as the TCS representative for Latin America in Chile, in Santiago. Pardon me for having omitted to mention that. He will also be joining us, and he will be telling us about the experience of one of the largest Indian companies to be present in Latin America for over 2 decades, and how their experience has been and what Latin America could mean for India. Very briefly, the Pacific Alliance is not just, as I mentioned earlier, another regional organization. It does not believe in having a secretariat or any formal bureaucratic structure. Meetings are held periodically at different levels, at technical levels, at political levels, at bureaucratic, at diplomatic levels. But the aim of this organization, as you will see further from the presenters, from the ambassadors and others, is basically to have a profound economic and commercial integration, to reduce and remove the barriers that exist, first of all, between these 4 countries. And the best part about it is that it's almost an open field. There are, if I'm not mistaken, almost 50 countries which are either associate members or have a higher status. India has an observer status since very early on, almost a decade. We were invited very kindly, and we took the opportunity to join as an associate member. It's very difficult to be a full member of this alliance unless you have free trade agreements with all the 4 countries, if I remember the rules right. And we are hoping that eventually India will basically consolidate its commercial and economic relationship, at least with these countries, with this alliance, to the point where it will almost be as a member. There are several advantages to this, which obviously we will hear as we go on. But I won't want to take more time of this panel, of this incredible panel that we have. What I would like to do is pass, first of all, on to Ms. Gloria Gante, Joint Secretary, Latin America. Gloria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sir Ambassador Mr. Deepak Bhojwani. I would like to, first of all, thank the Aspen Institute and the Embassy of Colombia and all the other embassies of the Pacific Alliance for having invited me for this very, very important event where we are celebrating 10 years of the Pacific Alliance. And a very good evening, good morning to all those who are joining us from Latin America. I think this difference in timing is also translating into a difference in seasons, and therefore this complementarity of, you know, goods and services, and those are actually something that are really which we can play to our strengths. But as far as the webinar is concerned, I think sometimes it's a bit difficult to coincide, but it's really nice to be here this evening. And I would like to begin by congratulating the Pacific Alliance on the 10th anniversary this year. Pacific Alliance has marked a momentous milestone in the regional integration process that began in Lima back in 2011. The Alliance has achieved a fair amount of success in its short period of existence with pragmatic goals for achieving economic integration. Its impressive international outreach is evidenced by the fact that, as Ambassador Bhojwani said, more than 59 observer states spanning across 5 continents consolidates this emerging, alliance. And we are very confident that it will further develop innovative proposals and initiatives that will contribute to the development and well-being of the people, and also its integration with the rest of the world. At a time when protectionist and anti-globalization sentiments are challenging the global economy. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Economy, the Pacific Alliance remains a champion for free and open trade. The alliance assumes greater significance in these times when uncertainties and challenges arising from the COVID-19 pandemic has thrown the global economy as crossroads. And we are very delighted to see that even during the COVID pandemic, the alliance has not has remained intact, and also come closer into responding to this challenges thrown up by the COVID pandemic. And with a combined population of 226 million, which is about 36% of the LAC population, the Pacific Alliance indeed plays an important role in the trade of the region and with the rest of the world. Almost 60% of trade of the region is generated by the members of this alliance, which is extremely impressive. And Pacific Alliance members have also performed very well in indices of human development, competitiveness, and the ease of doing business, which is shown in their rankings. So the potential role of the Pacific Alliance in creating productive regional value chains is highly commendable. We are really delighted to note the various pragmatic steps that the Alliance has taken so far. I just want to highlight some of which are there, like eliminating tariffs, facilitating the flow of people and talent across borders by removing business visa requirements, both short-term and long-term, and establishing an integrated stock exchange known as the Mercado Integrado Latinoamericano, which has become one of the largest stock exchanges in Latin America, is really noteworthy. Further initiatives of Pacific Alliance, like institutionalization of cooperation through the Cooperation Forum for Engagement with Observer States, with focus on 2030 Agenda and its SDGs, creation of a cooperation fund, are really encouraging steps that the Alliance has undertaken. On the environmental front, the Declaration on Sustainable Management of Plastics during the 14th Pacific Alliance Summit in Peru was highly commendable. From India's perspective as an environment champion, we, in the capacity of the observer state, were happy to support this declaration. And we also see great potential of the Pacific Alliance in developing more South-South cooperation schemes to tackle the challenges both of environment as well as any other challenges that has recently also been discovered in terms of health, etc. We are also happy to note the recent Pacific Alliance Presidential Declaration on Gender Equality, recognizing the fundamental role played by women in all their diversity, with special emphasis on vulnerable situations, women with disabilities, rural women, and indigenous women. India deeply values its engagement with the Pacific Alliance. We appreciate Pacific Alliance's impressive performance and the steps that have been taken to deepen greater partnership and integration. And we look forward to engaging more deeply with this alliance. Our trade with all the 4 member countries taken together was close to about $12 billion in 2020-21. Although it has come down from 14 billion in 2019-20, I can tell you that when, much before the COVID, it was 17 billion. And that was a very encouraging figure. And we hope that, we will definitely catch up with this. And there is ample scope for doing that. At present, our engagement, of course, under the PA umbrella is still very limited, but these new opportunities that we have discovered in terms of e-commerce, in terms of opportunities in the IT sector, for example, and the health sector. I think these are areas which we can look at more closely for our cooperation, future cooperation with the Pacific Alliance. With, of course, with the view to build on foundation of the India Pacific Alliance, we had also participated at the events that the Alliance had with FICCI, and in that too, we were very happy to contribute to the discussions that were there, which was organized in March 2021. This was Namaskar Pacific Alliance, and we look forward to joining such initiatives in the future as well. So after joining the Pacific Alliance in 2014 in February as an observer member, we also proposed a few areas for technical cooperation in the field of science and technology, small and medium enterprise sector, IT, and e-governance. Here, I would like to highlight that during the COVID, I think Pacific Alliance countries had actually highlighted the importance of e-commerce as well as the relevance of the small and medium enterprises. And therefore, there is definitely something here that we can harness to our advantage. We are happy that the Pacific Alliance had also unveiled a need-based technical cooperation portfolio during the first Technical Cooperation Forum in April 2019. And it has brought out several promising areas of possible future collaboration between India and the Pacific Alliance countries. Aligning with the priorities of the Pacific Alliance as projected by the pro tempore presidency last year, India had offered to collaborate on digital tools for publishing, scholarships for master's program in cultural management, scientific and technical cooperation on climate change and fisheries and aquaculture. So lastly, we believe that further institutional development in Pacific Alliance and clear rules will lead to an increase in investment and employment, which will ensure equal opportunities and reduce poverty. I'd like to reiterate that India, as an observer country, is definitely excited about the promise that this alliance has. And I thank you very much for listening to me today.
Thank you very much, Gloria, for your wonderful presentation, very informative. In fact, the trade figures are indeed impressive considering we've just been through a COVID year. I hope it gets better and better as time goes on. I'd now like to pass on to the Ambassador of Colombia in India, Mrs. Mariana Pacheco. Mariana.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Good evening, good morning in the Latin American Pacific. Dear Her Excellency Gloria Gante, Joint Secretary Latin America and the Caribbean, dear Ambassadors of Chile, Mexico, and Peru, dear Ambassador Deepak Bhojwani, Senor Marcelo Burman, Managing Director, TCS Latin America, dear friends and colleagues. I am honored to participate in this session as Ambassador of Colombia and pro tempore President of the Pacific Alliance, which in its 10th anniversary has consolidated itself as one of the most important integration initiatives in Latin America. I would like to thank Her Excellency Gloria Gante, who is not only our madrina, as we say in Spanish, godmother, Dharma Mata, for Latin America and Caribbean countries, but also someone who supports and spearheads our issues into India's foreign policy. My thanks for her leadership and profound understanding of the Pacific Alliance. I am also honored to be joined this evening by the Ambassador of Chile, Juan Angulo, the Ambassador of Mexico, Federico Salas, and Ambassador of Peru, Carlos Polo, who will present with me the most important achievements of the Pacific Alliance over the last decade and explain the potentials of India's engagement with our region. I would like to express my deepest appreciation to my friend Ambassador Deepak Bhojwani for moderating this session. Deepak has served as Ambassador of India to Colombia and other countries and is one of the most recognized analysts of Latin America, complex political and economic environment. Thanks also to the Ananta Center. Dear friends, the Pacific Alliance was founded in 2011 by Colombia, Chile, Mexico, and Peru, and as an innovative integration mechanism based on open regionalism. Its objective include to build an area of deep integration, moving progressively towards the free mobility of goods, services, resources, and people, to drive further growth, development, and competitiveness focused on achieving greater well-being, overcoming socioeconomic inequality, and promoting the social inclusion of its people, and to become a platform of integration with emphasis on the Asia and Indo-Pacific region. The Pacific Alliance does not seek to counterbalance other regional initiatives and stands as one of the most innovative integration strategies in the region. It is an open and flexible process with clear and pragmatic goals. Today, we can record with pride that the Pacific Alliance represents together the eighth economy of the world, 41% of Latin America's GDP, as well as 38% of the region's foreign direct investment. Over the last decade, the Pacific Alliance has grown global, with 59 observer states across the world and a dynamic relationship with many multilateral organizations such as the Inter-American Development Bank, CAF, ASEAN, and APEC. India became an observer state in 2014, and there is an ample space to deepen our friendship and closer ties. India's trade with the Pacific Alliance, which accounts for 40% of its trade with Latin America, has been growing rapidly before the pandemic, and now has the potential to reach 30 billion in the coming years. India's business sector has recognized the attraction of the large and growing market of the Pacific Alliance. The four countries gather a population of 230 million people and have an average per capita of $18,000. Our population is mainly young and constitutes a qualified labor force, as well as an attractive subset of consumers whose purchase power is in constant growth. More than 30 Indian companies have invested in the Pacific Alliance, and more companies are yet to come in areas such as IT, BPOs, software, pharma, energy, mining, manufacturing, etc. Also, Pacific Alliance companies are present in India with a growing interest in its market. And please let me reiterate, the Pacific Alliance is indeed a member of the Indo-Pacific family. I am sure if we put in the center of the map the Pacific Ocean, we could see Colombia, Chile, Mexico, and Peru as closer relatives of India on the eastern shore of the Pacific Ocean. We can be proud of the Pacific Alliance achievements while we recognize that the needs of our people are evolving, especially during this COVID times. We have to respond effectively to global challenges in a balanced and inclusive way. We often describe ourselves as a single economy because we have a common vision. Each of the 30 technical bodies of the Pacific Alliance has focused its work on the fulfillment of a more integrated alliance, doubling trade among member countries, a more global alliance incorporating 10 associate states, a more connected alliance, consolidating the alliance as leader of the digital economy, an alliance more accessible to its citizens, strengthening relations with civil society. So in these 10 years, These are some of the main achievements. With the entry into force of the trade agreements, 92% of tariffs were lifted in a common and immediate manner. It is expected to cover close to 100% of tariffs by 2030. More than 180 export, trade, investment, and tourist promotion activities have been carried out. These events have generated close to $1 billion in business opportunities. Phytosanitary and origin certificates are now exchanged between all the countries thanks to the interoperability of the foreign trade single windows. The Entrepreneurial Capital Fund has benefited startups with financial support for their growth and internationalization. Short-term tourism and business visas between the four countries have been abolished. The Declaration of the Sustainable Management of Plastics reflects the importance of sustainable development within the Alliance. The Pacific Alliance has an ecosystem of entrepreneurship and innovation with networks of accelerator agencies. The Pacific Alliance is working on the implementation of a social observatory through which the needs of the most vulnerable population are identified and joint policies are developed. The promotion of gender equality and the permanent incorporation of women in the economy is fundamental for the Pacific Alliance. The COVID pandemic has not halted the Pacific Alliance. In a context as challenging as the COVID, the Pacific Alliance managed to create a joint work plan to reduce the impact of the pandemic on the citizens and economies of the four countries. These are some of the initiatives. We're boosting the economic reactivation of the bloc through joint promotion actions. We're promoting e-commerce, public procurement, trading services, foreign direct investment, entrepreneurship and innovation, and sustainable tourism initiatives. Trade and investment. We're confident that the Alliance will play an important role in addressing common challenges and strengthening global value chains in this pandemic world. The major goal of the Alliance's trade agreement has been facilitating the accumulation rules of origin, which enables production sharing within the FTA territory. Economic integration has boosted the flow of intra-alliance investments, which have reached $8.3 billion in the last 5 years. In other words, we have worked to improve regulatory processes with an emphasis on transparency, efficacy, and trade facilitation. I would like to highlight that in 2021, the four countries have taken an important step, setting a roadmap for the digital market within the Pacific Alliance. This roadmap will enhance further our integration to meet the challenges of e-commerce. We foresee a great potential for Indian companies to engage in this area. New members, I'm glad to announce that negotiations with Ecuador and Singapore are well underway. We hope that Singapore will become an associate member in 2021 during Colombia's pro tempore presidency. We're also making progress in talks with Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. Another key feature of the Pacific Alliance is its flexibility. The participation of the private sector in the Pacific Alliance Business Council allows us to respond to the realities of the markets. The depth of our integration is reflected in the joint work that we are doing in many regions of the world. Today, the Pacific Alliance countries share 9 diplomatic missions located in Asia, Africa, and Europe. India's engagement. We find a great potential for India's engagement in the Pacific Alliance. During the 10th anniversary, President Ivan Duque invited the member countries to look for shared solutions for the production, fill and finish, and commercialization of COVID-19 vaccines. India's pharmaceutical companies and its impressive research and development and accessibility have all the potential to play a decisive role in our response to COVID and especially to our people. There are indeed ample opportunities for investment. In Colombia, for example, we have identified potential in sectors such as health and, of course, pharma, energy and renewable energy infrastructure, financial services, software, IT, and agribusiness. My message is that the Pacific Alliance encourages the expansion of Indian companies in the member countries. Our strategic location, affinity in culture, and the harmonization of standards facilitated the generation of production value chains in a market of 230 million people. We, as India, has expressed belief in Panchsheel, or five virtues, which mutual respect and equality and mutual benefit will certainly pave the way for a closer relationship between India and the Pacific Alliance, and as expressed, Vasu Deva Kutum Bakam, the world is one family. In other words, we're part of one single large Indo-Pacific family. As a family, we must live together in peace and harmony, work and grow together, and have trust in each other for mutual benefits. Allow me now to give the floor to my colleagues from Chile, Mexico, and Peru. Ambassador Juan, please, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Thank you very much. Dear Joint Secretary Latin American and Caribbean, Mr. Elegante, dear Ambassador Deepak Bhojwani, dear colleagues from the Pacific Alliance countries, dear Marcelo Burman, dear participants to this event, good evening and good morning to all of you. I would like first to join our pro tempore presidency in thanking the Ananta Center for collaborating in the celebration of the 10th anniversary of the Pacific Alliance. After this broad presentation by our presidency pro tempore, we are supposed to talk about more specific items, each of the ambassadors. In my case, it would be almost impossible to resume in only 5 minutes the work and achievements of this project of integration. Just allow me to start saying that the Alliance has been a key mechanism to enhance the free movement of goods, services, capital, and people between our countries. During the years, the Alliance has maintained its founding vocation. We keep this vocation, which is to deepen the integration among its members. But integration not only in the transaction of goods, but also facilitating the movements of capital and investments of people and culture, and also services, either in financial matters, either in consulting, in insurances, etc. We need to continue and deepen those policies. Even if we have done a lot, one of our challenges is to increase the intra-alliance commerce. Currently, 92% of all tariff lines are duty-free, and the goal is to reach 100% of goods by 2030. The Alliance has also promoted the adoption of a culture that ensures the good commercial relations between small and medium-sized enterprises, with large companies, and with governments. That's very important to help these small and medium-sized enterprises, because in a lot of countries, they constitute the whole of a gross part of the employment. We have also boosted the digital agenda of the Alliance with the participation of the private sector and the academy. The objective is to identify private sector needs and demands on professionals and technicians to adequate the studies and availability offers to these companies. We have also advanced in the elimination of barriers to electronic commerce, something of very special interest in the current pandemic situation. But we have also linked the Pacific Alliance to citizens, including new subjects and concerns of the people, such as the fighting and adapting the climate change, create a more resilient economic ecosystems, fight against the corruption, the enhancement of transparency, or foster the digital economy. For instance, we have recently eliminated the roaming among the Pacific Alliance countries. E-commerce is of paramount importance, and also artificial intelligence. We are also included in our discussions social development and tackle migration, which is a problem in the region. There is also the elimination of visa requirements for tourism and business among the member states, and that is since the almost very beginning of the Alliance. One important benefit is also the accumulation of origin, and that is the key issue for fostering intra-regional trade. Concerning specific areas such as the environment, it is of a great importance for the Alliance. We are working on an agenda that, in addition to bringing together the efforts of the private sector of the governments, will prioritize sustainability and orients its efforts toward green growth and strengthens the environment policies of each one of the member countries. One of these steps has been, as it was mentioned, the signing of 2019 of the Declaration of Sustainable Management of Plastics, by which the members will implement new policies to promote the integral management of this waste and reduce its presence in ecosystems. This considers areas such as the regulation of the one single use of plastics, the package and transportation using plastics materials, the innovation in eco-plastics, and education and information, which is very, very important, to the final consumer about good habits of rational use of plastics and the correct recycling methods. Also introduces consideration for fostering circular economy, which is also something of much interest for the Alliance, and fostering the blue economy, all of which is related to oceans and the preservation of oceans. All countries are maritime countries, so for us it's very important to contribute to the preservation of the health of the ocean. And of course, avoid the microplastics in marine, rivers and lakes environments. There are several working groups on the Alliance dealing with a roadmap to implement this comprehensive approach to sustainable plastic management, and again, involving the private sector and the public entities, as well as financial institutions such as the Inter-American Development Bank. I will stop here because we have a lot of things to say, so I give the floor to my colleague Federico from Mexico, Federico Salas.
Thank you very much, Juan, and thank you, of course, to the Nantes Center for hosting this event. Thank you to Gloria Gante for being here with us and for her words, the introduction. And of course, to my colleagues, to my colleague Mariana Pacheco, who's presiding pro tempore the Pacific Alliance, as well, of course, as to Carlos Polo, our ambassador of Peru. I also want to thank Mr. Deepak Bhojwani, Ambassador Bhojwani, for moderating this event, and Marcelo Wurman for joining us today. Let me talk about another aspect of one of the things that we're doing with the Pacific Alliance, which has more to do with the social aspects of what the Alliance is all about. We believe that the Pacific Alliance can contribute to attain sustainable societies by building more prosperous and equal economies. The Pacific Alliance countries have had the common challenge to address gender inequity, the digital gap, and disparity in access to education and training. The Alliance has identified the economic and commercial integration as an essential factor for recovery, especially after what has happened in the past 2 years. In this regard, facilitation of trade amongst the PA countries, we believe will help to job and new companies creation. The economic recovery, along with the reduction of disparities, will allow the PA countries to achieve a more inclusive and equal societies. Seeking further commercial integration, the Pacific Alliance has been working to reach new understandings in matters related to trade rules, processes, and trade barriers. The challenge that we've had is to become an effective tool for social and economic recovery after the pandemic. For such recovery, all of us support the initiative regarding women empowerment, a regional digital market, promotion of innovation and entrepreneurship, tourism revitalization, the promotion of employability, education, and training. As has been already mentioned, using e-commerce to grow our trade will also allow the medium and small-sized enterprises to access our regional market and face the current restrictions such as lockdown and social distancing. The Alliance is an unbeatable forum to promote more access for small and medium-sized companies to benefit from the possibilities that international trade offers. We have progressed also in mobility of goods and people, but we can enhance commercial facilitation and include more small and medium enterprises by closing the digital gap and promoting digital abilities. We can use private-public networks to improve entrepreneurship and employability of young people. And in order to reduce gaps between social groups, the Pacific Alliance has initiatives aimed at increased understanding and integration amongst youngsters in the region. One of them, for example, is a platform for academic and student mobility. The last call was for 400 scholarships to pursue exchange programs in other countries of the Pacific Alliance. Finally, with the purpose of enhancing mobility of people, the Alliance is working on evaluation and certification of labor competences, hoping that all of these measures, as I said at the beginning, will help us attain sustainable societies and a more prosperous economies. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to my colleague, the Ambassador of Peru, Ambassador Carlos Polo. Thank you.
Thank you, Federico. Good evening with everybody here in India and good morning in Latin America, especially in Santiago. Mrs. Gloria Ganstek, Joint Secretary, Minister of External Affairs of India, Ambassador Deepak Bhojwani, Distinguished Fellow of the Ananta Center and Chair of this event, Fellow Ambassador of the Chile, Colombia, and Mexico of the Pacific Alliance member countries, Mr. Marcelo Gurman, Managing Director of the Tata Consulting Services Latin America, who is in Santiago now, in Chile. Distinguished guests, I join my colleagues to, once again, welcome to all to the Pacific Alliance of the 10th event co-organized by the embassies of Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru, in partnership with the Ananta Center, one of the prime academic think. In my short intervention, first of all, I would like to briefly walk you through Peru's roles in the Alliance. As a country that has grown through its policy of openness to the world, and that is a firm believer in the power of integration and the Alliance embodies, I would like to also to share with you some of the work that the Alliance have done in the field of science technology, a topic that was addressed by the President Francisco Sagasti during the recent commemoration ceremony in the 10th years of the Pacific Alliance. Since the inception of the Pacific Alliance at the first presidential summit held in Lima in 2011, our country has continued to establish itself as one of the hubs for the economic activity in the region and a promoter of this innovation integration mechanism. Our country, within the group, represents one of the major business opportunity for investors and businessmen abroad. We export both traditional products, including minerals, oil, and natural gas, as well as value-added, non-traditional products, which are among the best that the world has to offer, including vegetables such as avocados, mangoes, grapes, citrus fruits, and blueberries, and others, well as chemicals, textiles, and fish products. Recently, we also began exporting mining equipment. In investment, we offer incentives to companies that wish to do business with Peru. About all things, we offer a completely non-discriminatory and equal treatment for all investors, regardless of their country and background. This, coupled with an unrestricted access to the majority of the economy sector, free transfer of capital, and a number of measures which seeks to empower private initiative, makes Peru a prime country to open a business. This is an overview of Peru's roles and participation in the nexus of trade and investment that is the Pacific Alliance. As the second part of my speech, I want to highlight that the Pacific Alliance is now working towards strengthening the science, technology, and innovation, components of its agenda of STI for short. Many studies said they have shown that investment in STI is crucial to drive economic growth forward in the long term, not the least for its beneficial impact on education, health, and productive activities. STI is also key to adapting to the changing landscape of integration in the face of the pandemic. In this regard, it's clear that COVID-19 have made even more visible the need to countries to build of strengthening STI capabilities to face the challenges that are rising in the fields of health, education, among others. While the primarily still rests on the shoulders of each individual government, it is clear the national effort should be complemented with international cooperation initiatives. In this framework, the Pacific Alliance has a joint work opportunities to strengthen the action of science and technology based on the strengthening and functional expansion of the current Technical Innovation Group. In this context, Peru worked on an initiative to expand and reinforce the function of the Technical Innovation Group, TIG. So that is not only addressed issues related to the innovation, but also to science and technology. This initiative will be decided at the next meeting of the Council of Ministers of the Pacific Alliance, envisioned for the second semester of this year. The new Technical Science, Technology and Innovation Group will have a main objective to design, propose, and coordinate programs and activities to promote science, technology, and innovation, highlighting its importance as a tool to improve the competitiveness of the Pacific Alliance and its member countries. On other hands, within the fields of the science, technology, and innovation, the development of a digital agenda has become a priority axis of work in the Pacific Alliance, especially against the pandemic situation that we are going through from last year. For this purpose, the regional bloc has been working on the initiative to constitute a regional digital market, MDR. As I see that my colleague from Mexico mentioned it in his intervention. Our active participation in areas such as science, technology, and innovation shows how Peru is working to imbue dynamism into the alliance. So, with this, let me conclude quoting the words of President Francisco Sagasti early. He said this year, the Pacific Alliance will be viewed by all, and Peru is an eager and engaged member with this adventure of integration. Thank you once again for your kind attention, and I hope that this short presentation may have given you some lights of Peru and the role it's playing in the Pacific Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you to all the ambassadors for all your enlightening presentations. I'd like to carry on after these very interesting interventions by the panelists by asking a question to our Joint Secretary, Ms. Gloria Gante first. Gloria, we have tremendously friendly political relations with all the countries in Latin America, I believe, and thanks partly to your efforts. Now, I know that with the 4 countries of the Pacific Alliance also our relations are extremely friendly. There is, however, an element of internal politics, particularly in India. We wonder when the internal politics will come to a stage where we will pay Latin America more attention. You've been partly responsible for ensuring that we do. How do you see it in reverse? There are lots of changes taking place in all of Latin America, in fact, everywhere in the democratic world. That's part of the democratic process. How do you see the changes that are taking place in the Pacific Alliance countries as either affecting, influencing, or enhancing the relationship with India and vice versa? Could you give us some of your insights?
You've given me such a, I think, very difficult question, sir. But I'll try to address it. I think whatever, there are a number of upheavals, let's say, not only in the Pacific Alliance countries, but in other places around the world as well. If we see Latin America, there has been changes of governments back and forth, of left and right, and of different flavors, let's say, of political leanings. So I think that despite all kinds of, let's say, ideas or political ideology that comes, our resolve and our interest in enhancing this relationship, I think, is based on not the political party of the day, I should say, but on the value system that we share, like the democratic values, the rule of law, and these principles of free trade, openness to trade. I think these still remain the same. And therefore, these are very important anchorings and let's say foundations that we have for the relationship to flourish. And whatever the political, Latin America, of course, has also gone through booms and bursts, cycles, even in their economy. Whatever they go through, we go through with them, along with them, and also try and see how much through the South-South cooperation process, or whether be the ITEC process, we try and reach out to each other. And I think that that solidarity will still remain, irrespective of the thing, because it is ultimately the people-to-people relations that also strengthen the relationship between governments, and they also spark off that connect. There is also this historical connection. There are various other things. It's not just the political, let's say, rumblings or changes that will just necessarily shake the relationship. I think, as I'd like to reiterate the fact that all of us in the Pacific Alliance and India, we share these same values. And I think that those values will continue to bind us together in the years to come.
Thank you, Gloria, for that excellent response. I'd like to also add here that apart from the fact that we share common values, etc., as you mentioned, we also have a growing economic and commercial relationship, as has been outlined over here. And I think that is going to form the bedrock of the strength of the relationship. Thank you very much. I'd like to pass on now to the Ambassador of Colombia, if I may, and ask the question. We do have some questions from the panel, but I have one in particular. If you don't mind, Ambassador Pacheco, the Pacific Alliance is often referred to as one of the most dynamic integration groups in the world. What makes the Pacific Alliance different from other regional integration initiatives?
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Bhojwani, for that question. It is quite interesting. The Pacific Alliance is a unique integration initiative, as it operates without a central budget headquarters, and we don't have a complex internal institutions such as Secretariat. It's not a regional association, but rather an alignment. This means we're not legally incorporated. We don't have a building with the title Pacific Alliance. The Pacific Alliance is within each activity, each desk, each of us, wherever we are. That that has given us, for example, the flexibility and adaptability to not to halt all the work during the pandemic. We operate with a collaborative hierarchical structure, and we're a system within the more than 30 working groups, and we focus on those groups with a long-term vision. We always have the 2030 visions, those that we have explained, and goals in our minds. It has been studied that the Pacific Alliance is as being an alignment, contributes very much to the resilience of the four countries, and through more an adaptation strategy and not an adaptability strategy. Therefore, this represents our institutions that is both stable and agile. And that's why we can adapt. It worked really well, and it showed the world during the pandemic. For example, when we celebrated the 10 years of the Pacific Alliance, it was an online event, and every president was in their respective countries, as well as their ministers. So that shows the flexibility and how agile is the Pacific Alliance itself. Now with COVID, of course, we created and we strengthened the 2030 goals and the strategy looking forward with the 2030 goals, and of course boosting the economic reactivation of the 4 countries in those areas that we really need to promote, such as e-commerce, procurement, trading services, foreign direct investment, of course, health and pharmaceuticals, entrepreneurship, innovation, digital economy, and of course, sustainable businesses in the 4 countries. Thank you, Deepak.
Thank you so much, Mariana. This is so revealing, because from what you all have said, it seems to me that what the Pacific Alliance is trying to do is create and consolidate the socio-economic infrastructure so that economies and commerce of these countries can flourish. Very interesting.
Right.
I'd like to pass on to the Ambassador of Chile, Juan Angulo. Ambassador, if I may ask, which measures developed by Chile to preserve the environment would be interesting to share within the framework of the Pacific Alliance?
Thank you for the question, Deepak. In fact, environment and preservation of environment is crucial for everybody, not only Pacific Alliance. It's a cross-border challenge for countries. And when you're talking about environment, it is not only climate change. There are several initiatives that Chile has implemented in the past years for the preservation of the environment. I could mention briefly the law prohibiting plastic bags and plastics for the single use. We have this since 2017, and it was implemented fully in 2018, and it was a precursor of what was done in the alliance some time later. Initiated in the Santiago, in the big cities of the country, and then it goes into the coastal areas, because we identified that most of the plastic bags were ending up in the marine environment. We also have these declarations of protected maritime zones, which protects the sea and marine environments, taking care of preservation of resources and the communities who are living in the coastal areas, which is also very important consideration, taking into consideration all the social aspects that my colleagues have mentioned on the social development of the alliance. Now we could say that we have more than 40% of our economic zone, maritime zones, under protected zones. We have also fomented high levels of ambition in the national determined contributions for the elimination of CO2 on the atmosphere within the framework of the Paris Agreement. We know we joined India on these efforts, and we have been part also of several coalitions for ambition on having more elimination of production of CO2 to the atmosphere. We have also, for instance, enacted the law of extended responsibility of the producer, which deals with the waste after the normal life cycle of some products. I am thinking in heavy oils. I'm thinking in batteries. I'm thinking in wheels. And of all of this is related to what we have been trying to foster, which is the recycling of goods, and implementation, a series of measures to implement the circular economy, which is also a concept of interest for a lot of countries, the circular economy. During the next few weeks, we will introduce also a bill that duplicates the obligation of non-conventional renewable energies quotas in our national electric systems. So that that source of energy will now represent more or less 40% of the metrics by 2030. All this is in our goal of have a decarbonized economy on 2050. We have also in this matter, for instance, accelerate the retirement or reconversion of 8 coal plants by 2024. We had this goal some years ago, but we have been able to accelerate that, and we are fulfilling this objective this year instead of 2024. And we expect that by 2025, half of the operating plants will be closed. That is more or less 14 of the 28 coal plants working currently in the country. So this is some measures that we have done and that we are trying to promote and have that also in our Pacific Alliance state members.
Thank you very much, Juan. It's so inspiring to see Chile doing so much for the environment. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the earlier members to join the International Solar Alliance, co-sponsored with India. Thank you. I'd like to pass on to the Ambassador of Mexico, Ambassador Salas. What would be the most significant initiative of the Pacific Alliance for economic recovery?
Yes, thank you. I think, recalling some of the things that I said earlier, I think that the Pacific Alliance, as I said, aims for sustainable and inclusive development to become more equal societies. The Alliance has intended to attain deep integration, which will help to close the gaps of different types, the digital, educational, and gender-based. All efforts to increase the trade of goods and services amongst the members of the Pacific Alliance countries, we think will contribute to economic and social recovery in the post-pandemic scenario. The use, particularly the use of digital tools to facilitate commercial operations will allow new players to contribute to economic growth. As we increase trade, which is one of the purposes of the Pacific Alliance, we believe that we will boost recovery, not only for local companies as suppliers, but we will broaden options for consumers in the region. The Alliance's goal of inclusion will lead us to reduce inequities for women and youngsters, which is something that Mexico has given a great priority. And besides the program for training of young people that I made reference to in my earlier intervention, we also have a priority program to provide internet access to, in the case of Mexico, to the entire population. But this is also something that has been worked out for the other countries in the Pacific Alliance. So we think that these are some of the measures, not, of course, not everything that can be done, but some of the representative measures that will be done for to aid in the economic recovery. Thank you.
Fascinating, Ambassador. Thank you so much. You also indirectly almost answered another question on educational technology that one of the panel, that one of the audience had posed. I'd like to pass on now to Ambassador Carlos Polo. Ambassador, how do the member countries in the Pacific Alliance cooperate in the diplomatic and consular domains? There was mention about common emissions, etc.
Yes, thank you for the question, Deepak. This issue is very important for us. Our main object, as we know, in the Pacific Alliance is trade, commerce, investment, etc. But this point is very important. So in this way, the Pacific Alliance is actively working toward expanding the framework of their relations with certain states and increasing its diplomatic and consular presence. With this goal in mind, the members countries of the Pacific Alliance promote the use of part of the deep facilities and infrastructure of the embassies of consulars of their respective state before third states for the operation of the diplomatic or consular mission of the state on of another country of the Pacific Alliance. In the case of Peru, we have a memorandum of understanding was signed with Colombia and another with Mexico to allow to use the facilities and infrastructure of the embassies of our consulate. Based on this bilateral instrument, specific agreements were signed that incorporate all information that was considered relevant for the shared usage in the facilities. Currently, in different arrangements, the countries of the Pacific Alliance are sharing the building of their chancellery of 8 different countries, and before one international organization of the OECD, Chile and Colombia in Paris. In the case of Peru, where we share a building with Colombia in both Vietnam and Hungary in all 4 countries shared a building in Accra, Ghana. The strategic vision of the Pacific Alliance for the year 2030 establishes as a projection of the opening a new diplomat headquarters or shared commercial offices in response to the common interests of the Pacific Alliance. Regarding consular cooperations, one of the Pacific Alliance lines of the work is mobility of people and facilitation of migratory transit. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Peru participates in the technical group alongside our migratory authority. As a further example of cooperation in this area was the recent presentation of the Pacific Alliance Travels Guide, the Vacation and Work Guide, and the Consular Cooperation Guide. Finally, we abolished the visa requirement for nationals and permanent residents of our 4 countries. Agreements were signed that help facilitate the mobility of national as well as vacation and work programs. Fees charged for using visa to beneficiaries of the student platform of the vacation program were waived. That is the facility that we are doing now in this field, no?
Thank you so much, Carlos. That was fascinating. It's truly incredible and inspiring to see how 4 countries can gather together, not just to lower economic and commercial barriers, but also to use their strengths collaboratively and collectively to represent each of the 4 nations in foreign countries. I wish we could do the same in South Asia, Gloria, but we'll take that up at another time. I have a question from our audience, which I thought, well, they always talk about the elephant in the room. And since we are talking about the Pacific, all 4 countries face the Pacific. And also we are all aware that there are 19 members of Latin American, of the China's Belt and Road Initiative in Latin America. The question that we are asked is, how does the Pacific Alliance see its evolving relations with China and its participation in the BRI? I'd like to open the floor to the panel. Ladies first, Mariana.
Thanks, Deepak. Yes, China has quite a presence in the Pacific Alliance. It's either the first or second trade partner. And let me focus my question on the Pacific Alliance. China has been a member since 2013, a year before India, as well as the United States. And China does have an FTA with Chile and Peru. It does not have an FTA with Colombia or Mexico, and which is one of the requirements to become an associate member of the Pacific Alliance. As Joint Secretary Gloria said, with India, there is a huge opportunity for growth between the Pacific Alliance and India. And I'm just gonna go over what she said. We share the same values, the same objectives on trade. Currently, we share the same objectives on uplifting our our economies and going again in the path of growing our GDP. And of course, solidarity is one of our main topics and priorities among the 4 countries, and we are much in need, as we have listened, cooperation and trans trade between the Pacific Alliance and India. So with that, we have quite a road to keep on working with India. So India and the Pacific Alliance come closer and closer together.
Thank you very much. Would anyone of the other panelists like to say anything before we move on? Okay, there's another question. What is the relationship between the OAS and the Pacific Alliance, since some areas would surely overlap? Ambassador Federico, Ambassador Angulo.
The Organization of American States, I mean.
Yes, that's right. The question is, how is there an overlap? I mean, does the OAS, perhaps the questioner wants to ask, whether there is an overlap between...
I just briefly would say that they are completely different in nature groups, association of countries. The OAS is an institution, really the Organization of American States, working to putting together all the countries in the region with a huge difference relation to our Pacific Alliance, which is more concentrated in commerce, in free trade, and in free movements of people, investments. We have a different structure. The objectives are different. Maybe there is some overlapping as well, because there's some also group of nations working together. There will always be some overlappings, but they are 2 different entities with 2 different ideas and ways of creation and functioning. We have a consensus, not votes. I mean, there are so many different in infrastructure, in the organization itself. The secretariat, there's a lot of differences. I don't see any problem in the coexistence of the 2. That's my short comment.
Any other comments, Ambassador Salas?
No, I mean, I would agree.
Sorry.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was going to say that I very much agree with what my colleague, the Ambassador of Chile, you said. I mean, there are two different entities with different purposes. We're all members, of course, of the OAS. We, participate in the different working organs of the Organization of American States, but the dynamics that we're working with are different. And then, just like there are other entities within Latin America which are also of members of the OAS with different purposes. There's the Mercosur, there's the CARICOM. Different subgroupings within the continental structure, which are of the same country members of the OAS. So we live alongside with each other. That's basically what I would say.
Thank you. Ambassador Polo, you wanted to say something? You're mute, I believe. Oh,
yes, yes. So just to complement, I would say Ambassador from Chile and Mexico. The OAS is an organization, our regional organization, which the members are whole countries from the Latin American Caribbean. It was created in 1948. This is the different constitution. It's a political, basically it's a political forum to discuss our problem and resolve it in terms of the democracy, equality, no-intervention, about our principal rules that we have in our region. That is the main difference, no? But that is very, very important. The OAS is very important for our region, obviously, but just exactly when we create the Pacific Alliance, that we would like to separate all the political issues and concentrate just in investment, commerce, and develop the economy, no? That is the main difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd just like to ask Ananta Center if we have any more time. Can we continue?
So we just have about a minute left.
All right, then in that case, I think it's about time we wind up. It's such a pity because I was getting so excited myself, and I'm sure a lot of our audience, the panelists are such a distinguished number of people that I feel we would need perhaps more than one more webinar to really cover this and other topics thoroughly. I'd just like to thank all the 4 ambassadors, Ambassador Mariana, Ambassador Juan, Ambassador Federico, and Ambassador Carlos, and last but not the least, my good friend Gloria Gante, and of course, Marcelo Wurman from Santiago for waking up early enough to join us, although you might be doing that regularly. I'd like to finally thank the Ananta Center for having organized this and for giving us all the opportunity to learn something about an organization, a region, and partners across the oceans who are so vital. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a very good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.